I kind of put the two of these together because I think they're quite interrelated and interconnected, and we'll see this as we go along. And the whole point here is to look at why deity worship is present, why we do deity worship, why deity worship has been, introduced by the acharyas, etc., why Krishna also instructed in deity worship. And then after that, we'll look a little bit at why we should do deity worship, why it's beneficial for everyone. And this discussion is for home or temple worship, whereas the seminars or the webinars we did recently or the last few weekends were focusing on home worship. This is just focusing, the topics from now on are just going to be focusing on deity worship in general. So they'll be applicable to both home and temple worship. And there's a few references. I can give them to you at the end if you like, but a few references I'll be covering, specifically Nectar Devotion, chapter 13, which deals with the 5 most powerful forms of devotional service. Then Srimad Bhagavatam 7, 5, 23, 24, very well-known verse for those of you who study the Bhagavatam, where Prahlad Maharaj talks to or explains to his father what the 9 processes of devotional service are. Then also a little bit from the Chaitanya Charitamrita and 2 sections there in chapter 22 and chapter 15 of the Madhya Lila. Okay, so we'll just move on. So these are, to me, these are 2 quite essential questions: why we worship a deity and why we should do deity worship. And part of what I'm hoping to demonstrate through this discussion is that it's generally understood that, while it's generally understood that deity worship is beneficial for beginning devotees, it doesn't end there, because we see that there are many great stalwart devotees, even like our prominent acharyas, the Goswamis like Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Raghunath Das Goswami. They all engaged in deity worship in one way or another. They established temples, and they themselves personally worshiped the deity. And even for some time, Lord Chaitanya himself engaged in deity worship. We see that Srila Prabhupada also engaged in deity worship. So it's quite a significant practice or significant aspect of the process of bhakti, and we want to look at it a little bit further. And also, we will try to explore a little bit how these great souls deepen their relationship with Krishna through the process of deity worship. So we see that so much time, energy, and money is expended in deity worship. And sometimes we hear the question whether this is justified or not. And so we'll look at that a little bit, and in the second part, why we do deity worship. And there's many different reasons that can be given. I'm going to identify some that I feel are more prominent, and just explore those a little bit. And in another seminar, I was thinking to do it in this webinar, but I feel it's probably better to do it in another webinar, just because if you try to squeeze too much into one session, it's a little bit hard to digest all the information. So I thought just to focus on these 2 points, and then in another webinar, I'll look more closely at what is deity worship, what is the purpose and goal of deity worship. And this will help us to develop our understanding how it is actually something that really is worth doing, and that everyone is actually encouraged to get involved and do deity worship. Okay. So we'll just go on to the next slide there. So the first thing I wanted to look at was why deity worship, and when this slide comes up, for those who aren't seeing it yet on Facebook, I think it's going to come up in a second. Okay, you got it now. It helps us to develop basic qualities, and I'll explain this more in a moment. Then also it helps with our personal purification. It helps to subdue, material desires and actually eventually remove all material contamination. It reminds us that Krishna is the supreme enjoyer, and that we are servants of Krishna. And also, ultimately, it helps us to develop a personal, loving relationship with Krishna. All right, so we'll just move on a little bit. So the first thing, I'm not sure if I've got a slide for this one or not. Okay, yeah, we do have one here. Now, in Kali Yuga, as we understand, Kali Yuga is a very, very difficult time. And we see in Kali Yuga that there is actually a lack of respect for exalted personalities. Even anyone who's tried living their life as a Brahmana realizes it's a very, very difficult task, because the respect is not there that was previously there for Brahmanas. We can see in the Vedic age, or if you've ever read the Mahabharata, you can see that Yudhisthira and the other leaders, they had great respect for the Brahmanas. They're always worshipping the Brahmanas, they're giving charity to the Brahmanas, they would look after the Brahmanas, make sure they're well cared for, etc. But in this day and age, it's very much every man for himself. And we see that, not only for Brahmanas, but even for exalted persons, there is lack of respect. And we also see in this day and age that many people have no respect for the deity in the temple. Or alternatively, you may see that devotees in the beginning stage, they may not respect the advanced Vaishnavas properly, but they'll respect the Lord in the temple. Now, there's a really interesting passage in the 7th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. I think it's the 3rd last chapter of the 7th canto. And in there, Narad Muni is explaining to Yudhisthira Maharaj ideal family life. And there's one verse I would like to read to you. And I've got a few extracts from the purport, which I'll just go over briefly. And Narad Muni is saying, "My dear king, when great sages and saintly persons saw mutually disrespectful dealings at the beginning of Treta Yuga, deity worship in the temple was introduced with all paraphernalia." So we see that the first age is called Satya Yuga. Then the second age is Treta Yuga, then Dvapara Yuga, then now in Kali Yuga. So the dominant mode of nature in Satya Yuga is goodness, and goodness has many, many good qualities. But what we see happens is as soon as it goes over to Treta Yuga, then the qualities start to diminish. And this is what Narad Muni is pointing out, that Satya Yuga is over, the good qualities are finished, and well, not finished, but they're reducing. And then as it moves into Treta Yuga, one of the first things that happens is they saw disrespectful dealings towards saintly persons, especially advanced Vaishnavas, etc. And Srila Prabhupada explains that because of material contamination, because as the ages advance, the living entities or the people living on the planet, they become more and more affected by material contamination till we get to the point of Kali, where the material contamination is at its greatest, and all the saintly and auspicious qualities are minimal. And even we find in this day and age, for Brahminical qualities, there's 12 different qualities of, no, actually not 12, I think there's 9 different qualities of Brahmana. There's only 2 that are prevalent, and even those are not very strong. And Srila Prabhupada explains that is honesty and cleanliness. And we see that in this age, not very, very strong evidence of them in this age. And so Prabhupada, he points out in his purport that because of material contamination with the advanced ages, disrespectful dealings appeared even among Brahmanas and Vaishnavas. And we see that, as it comes towards Kali Yuga, just before the start of Kali Yuga, this is the famous story that's in the beginning of the Bhagavatam, that Sringhi, who was the son of a very, very elevated Brahmana, he disrespected the king. He disrespected the leader of the kingdom. And he cursed Maharaj Parikshit. So we see that this is just more evidence of these disrespectful dealings. And this happened immediately after Satya Yuga. And as Prabhupada points out in his purport to this verse, there was even disrespectful dealings amongst Vaishnavas. So this was starting to become prominent. And you'll see many stories in the Puranas and the Vedas and things like that, how as the ages unfolded, how these disrespectful dealings became more and more prominent. And Srila Prabhupada, he emphasizes this is because of material contamination, as the modes of material nature become especially into raja and tama, or passion and ignorance, and they start to influence the general population, then this disrespect becomes more and more prevalent. Yeah? And the point that is being made there is when the great saintly persons saw this contamination, they were concerned, because the nature of the great saintly persons is they're concerned about the welfare of living entities. We see the same is there in the beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam in the first canto, the first few chapters, that the sages had assembled at Nrsimha to perform 1,000-year sacrifice for the benefit of the people of the planet. Not so much for their own benefit, but for the benefit of everyone else. And so the same sort of mindset is there. And the great saintly persons, they saw this contamination, so okay, we'll introduce deity worship. Deity worship is not something new. It's eternal. It's an eternal activity. Just like we see, I think I described in a previous class how there is there's different types of, there's 5 prominent forms or eternal forms of Lord. And that's Para, Vyuha, Vaibhav, Vilas, and Archa. So the Archa is an eternal form. It's not that they just made this up and introduced deity worship at the beginning of Treta Yuga. No, it's something that's there eternally, but they put emphasis on this practice, and it became more and more prominent in Dwapara Yuga as we see Lord Chaitanya. Actually, sorry, not Lord Chaitanya. It's described in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, where it mentions that in Satya Yuga the process was meditation. In Treta Yuga, the religious process was yagya, performing fire sacrifice. In Dwapara Yuga, the religious process was deity worship. And now in Kali Yuga, the religious process is Harinam Sankirtan, chanting Hare Krishna. But unfortunately, the deity worship is becoming more and more neglected. And as we'll demonstrate a little bit later on, but actually it's very, very important for living entities to engage in deity worship because it helps them in their personal evolution. So we see here at the beginnings of Kali Yuga, there was this. At the beginning of Treta Yuga, there was this disrespectful dealing amongst the various persons, especially the concern was amongst the Brahmins and the Vaishnavas. Therefore, the compassionate nature of the great souls is they introduce deity worship to help the conditioned living entities cultivate their relationship with Krishna. Because unless we have these basic qualities, it's very, very difficult to cultivate a relationship with Krishna. And these qualities begin by having common respect amongst each other, by having proper dealings amongst Vaishnavas, Brahmanas, and even the people in general. Yeah. So, and also I wanted to kind of try to draw a little bit, not so much because I haven't really had time to explore this deeply, and it's a topic that will take quite a lot of exploring. But there is a correlation with the progression of a devotee from Shraddha to Prem. And we see in the beginning how a devotee has a little bit of faith. He accepts that yes, Krishna, I believe that Krishna is God. Therefore, I want to apply myself to this process. So it says, what is it? Adosharata sadhu sangha bhajana kriya nata nivati shat. So it starts off the devotee has a little bit of faith. And then as Tatra Sadhu, then they associate with devotees. So in this case, Srila Prabhupada is talking about how in one of these purports that I was looking at today, he talks about how the spiritual master guides the devotees in deity worship so they can actually cultivate their Krishna consciousness. So then by associating with devotees, then they start to practice the process of devotional service, which means anata nivriti. They start to practice the process. Then bhajana kriya. Bhajana kriya means more focused on the process, but it means also this anata nivriti means to remove the impurities in the heart. So one goes from having very minimal qualities or no good qualities to start to developing some good qualities, and then as they progress in the process of devotional service, then they will start to take their faith deepens, they take the process more seriously, and then they take initiation. Then after some time they'll take Brahman initiation, then they'll start to worship the deity in the temple. So we can see as they're making advancement, they actually, their practice of devotional service evolves more and more. All right, so another very important point here. I don't know if you can see these graphics, but we see how people in this world, they have so many desires for material enjoyment, for material gain. You know, you can see the man and the woman here. You know, they're after jewelry and fancy jewelry and perfumes and nice cars, etc., like that, to show off their wealth to their friends, to be known as a good a good or a wealthy person. Yet ultimately, this just actually increases their frustration in this material world, because they see there's an interesting statement from Lao Tzu, who was in Chinese philosophy, he was like the precursor of Confucius. And his conclusion was that advertising was one of the worst things that you can actually have, because what it does, it allows people to know about things they normally wouldn't know about, or to develop desires to have these things they normally wouldn't know about or normally wouldn't care about. And we see in the modern world how the advertising industry is very, very active in trying to attract the conditioned living entity to some material acquisition. You know, it might be a nice car, it might be a nice house, it might be a holiday by the sea. You know, so many different things that are there that are being advertised. And really all it's doing is just trying to agitate the living entity's senses in order to hanker for these, things, in order to desire these things more and more. And Srila Prabhupada, an interesting analogy he used was that this material process, or the material desires, fanning the material desires, is like, if you have a fever, and instead of acting to bring the fever down, you act to increase the fever. And anyone who knows a little bit about medicine realizes that when you get to a certain temperature, it might be 135 or 137 degrees or something like that, then the body becomes too hot for the jiva to remain in the body, so the living entity leaves the body, or from the external point of view, the living entity dies. So this is what material life is like. It's like trying to satisfy all these material desires, but actually they're counterproductive, or they actually go against the nature of the jiva. Now, there's a really nice verse and purport. Mostly, the verse describes the beautiful form of the Lord, how he's got a peacock feather and different things like that. But in the verse, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada discusses a little bit about the importance of deity worship. And this is from the Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 3, Text 22. And Srila Prabhupada explains that engagement in such worship of the deity under the direction of a bona fide spiritual master. See, this point of the Guru, very important here, is that that we need to engage in deity worship under the guidance of someone. It's not you might go to the local hardware store and you get this do-it-yourself, make a cupboard. They sell. I know there's a shopping center, a shopping chain called IKEA, and you can go and buy cupboards from them, and they come with a set of directions on how to assemble the cupboard. Spiritual life's not like that. There's no set of directions on you can just apply this yourself and go back to Godhead. No, you need to be under the guidance of a qualified person. Someone can actually guide you on the path back to Godhead. And deity worship it's no less important to have guidance. We see that many devotees have tried to implement their own ideas in deity worship and got a little bit lost on the way. So very important to have the guide. And Srila Prabhupada, he continues, says, under the direction of the bona fide spiritual master, will greatly help the household holders purify their very existence and make rapid progress in spiritual knowledge. So the conjunction of deity worship and the Guru instructing the devotee in deity worship helps us to purify our existence and make rapid progress. And I think that's a very important point that Srila Prabhupada says, rapid progress in spiritual knowledge. And then he goes on to say that simple theoretical book knowledge is not sufficient. In the beginning stages, you need to practically engage yourself in the activities of devotional service. And it's very easy to understand, really, is because of our natures, because we're influenced strongly by the modes of nature, especially passion and ignorance, then we take that nature and we engage that nature in Krishna service. If we try to be artificial and try to act in a way that is not compatible with our nature, so if we, just like we see in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna was saying to Krishna, well, I don't want to engage in this ghastly warfare. I'm going to go to the forest and become a sage. Krishna said to Arjuna, he said, but this is not your nature, and you will act according to your nature. So we can pretend for some short time to be something we're not, but actually our true nature will come out in due course. And this is the point that's being made here, is we need, because of our passionate nature, we need some practical engagement to engage the senses in some activity. Otherwise, the mind will become disturbed. So Prabhupada makes the point then that spiritual knowledge must be developed by a combination of theoretical and practical knowledge. And that is the guaranteed way of attainment for spiritual perfection. So by engaging in deity worship under the guidance of a qualified teacher, one can achieve spiritual, and Prabhupada says, the guaranteed way for spiritual perfection. Yeah? And there's another point that Srila Prabhupada brings out in the purport, which I think is really, really important. And this is something we could really benefit a lot from. And Prabhupada makes this point. It says, only attention engaged in the service of the Lord, especially in dressing and decorating the temple, and also the deity. Because we see that, like the tendency of the living entities in this day and age. Just I was in a shopping center the other day with my wife, and she was just because it's getting colder here now, so she was looking for a good winter coat. And there was some other people in there, and they were trying on some clothes, and just the way they were kind of like putting the clothes on, looking themselves in the mirror, and just they're really into themselves looking really nice and attractive and things like that. So they were enamored by their own appearance. And so Prabhupada is saying that only attention engaged in the service of the Lord, especially in dressing and decorating the temple, because by doing this for Krishna, the nature is there that you want to do these things. You want to dress up nice, you want to decorate, but if you do that for Krishna, what happens is you satisfy the need within yourself, but also you become purified of the need to do it to yourself. It's a very simple science. Prabhupada would sometimes make a point. He said that all these things in the material world are just big zeros. And you can take thousands or millions of zeros and you put them together and they still equal zero. But if you take the one, you take Krishna, and you put it in front of these zeros, then you have something very, very significant. So essentially, the process of bhakti is taking the I out of the center and putting Krishna in the center. It's not really changing what you're doing. If we're dressing the deity, we dress ourselves, we dress the deity, so we make the deity look very beautiful. We're still doing the same activity. So that need that the jiva has to dress up and to decorate things is becoming satisfied. But by doing it for Krishna, then the material desires are being removed. Then Prabhupada goes on to, accompanied by musical kirtan and spiritual instructions from scriptures, can save common man from the hellish cinema attractions and rubbish sex songs broadcast everywhere by radios. And of course, it's by over the internet, and it's everywhere you go now. You can hear all these things, just being broadcast. And the whole idea is to infuse the mundane mind with spiritual inspiration, and then the mundane mind becomes spiritualized, and it stops being attracted to these mundane things. Now, I'll go on a little bit. Now, this next reference for me is a very important reference. This is Prabhupada's quoting from Jiva Goswami's Bhakti Sandarbha. And he makes the point in his explanation, Jiva Goswami, that the Bhagavatam says that deity worship and initiation are not necessary. But Jiva Goswami points out that actually in this age they're very, very important. And he says, I'll just read the direct quote. It says, although deity worship is not essential, the material conditioning of most candidates for devotional service requires that they engage in this activity. When we consider their bodily and mental conditions, we find the character of such candidates is impure and their minds are agitated. Therefore, to rectify this material conditioning, the great sage Narada and others at different times recommended various kinds of regulations for deity worship. And that's referring back to that the verse I quoted at the beginning. But if we just take a moment to reflect on this, Jiva Goswami made this statement 500 years ago. What's the situation now? How much more agitated are people's minds now? And how, therefore, how much more important is deity worship? So I just want to move on to the next point. Now we see that by engaging in deity worship, we can start to understand the nature of Krishna as the supreme enjoyer, because you'll see that we offer Krishna great opulence. We offer him, we feed him 6 times a day. Like in the morning, if anyone's ever been, excuse me, to Bhaktivedanta Manor, in the morning they offer him a big tray of milk sweets. 4 burfis, 4 pera, 4 sandesh, 4 rasgulla, 4 rasmalai, rabri. And they're not small burfi. They're quite sizable burfis. And every morning at 4 a.m. Krishna's eating that, and then he has his breakfast around about 7:30. Then he has a massive lunch at around noon. Then in the afternoon, after his sleep, he'll have another offering. Then in the evening around 6:30, he'll have another offering. And then at last in the evening at around about 8:30, 8:45, something like that, he'll have the what they call the Shayan bowl, or the resting, the sleeping offering. And Prabhupada, he asked the devotees in Mayapur to make this a feast. And you'll see there's like 13, 14, 15 preparations, and big trays. They're like probably at least 2 foot across the trays they use there. And also he's dressed in very beautiful opulent dresses. There's so many people serving him very actively, and with great endeavor serving him. So you see how, like, even if we look at ourselves, if we tried to eat what Krishna eats every day, it wouldn't be long before we got quite unwell. So, we can see how, we can't enjoy like Krishna can enjoy. So we understand how he's a supreme enjoyer. And then, of course, leading towards the culmination, I guess, in a sense, of one's evolution, is we develop a personal reciprocal relationship with Krishna. It's not like a one-way relationship. It's actually a two-way relationship. And we see that in this world, everyone is looking for pleasure in relationships. This is what life is about for a human being, is to have pleasurable relationships. But we often find that people become very dissatisfied with these relationships. And then they go looking for satisfaction in relationships with people or other living entities they feel cannot hurt them, like cats, dogs, goldfish, things like that. Or sometimes, people, they'll try to have relationships through the computer, through social media networks and things like that. But it's a very sort of one-way relationship, and you can easily disconnect from the relationship if you find it's not satisfying you. But these relationships aren't really fulfilling. But through Krishna, or with Krishna, we can have the most satisfying relationship. Now we see that also these relationships are generally developed through mutual exchange activities. The Lord, he has a spiritual form, but we have a material form. So it's a little bit difficult for us to perceive him through our material body. But through the process of deity worship, he gives us this opportunity whereby we can exchange with him through what appears to be matter and actually develop our loving relationship with Krishna. Now, there's an interesting verse in the Nectar of Devotion, or an interesting quote there. You may have heard this before, where Rupa Goswami explains, he says, "My dear friend, if you still have any desire to enjoy the company of your friends within this material world, then don't look upon the form of Krishna, who is standing on the bank of Keshigat. He is known as Govinda, and his eyes are very enchanting. He is playing his flute, and on his head there is a peacock feather, and his whole body is illuminated by the moonlight in the sky." So Rupa Goswami is making the point here that if we engage in the worship of the deity, either in the temple or at home, then we'll forget all the relationships of so-called friendships, love, and society, and actually start to develop transcendental, eternal relationship with God. And Rupa Goswami also explains in the same chapter that if we want to forget the nonsense of material friends, we must see the beautiful form of the Lord. So, and also we find that as devotees make tangible advancement in spiritual life, they actually start to have a direct exchange with the Lord. Just like we see there's that wonderful story of Sakshi Gopal, where the young Brahmana, he was talking with Gopal, and Gopal was talking back. And then the young Brahmana, he asked Gopal to come and be a witness, and Gopal said, "But I'm a deity, I can't walk." And the young Brahmana, he responded, he says, "My dear Lord, if you can walk, if you can talk, you can walk. So let's go." And then so Gopal agreed, and he gave certain conditions. He said he had to feed him every day, but he couldn't never look back. And he said, "But how will I know you're following me?" And he said, "Because you will hear my ankle bells as I walk." And so Gopal, he followed him to a far distant village, and was actually was witness to the words of the senior Brahmana. So, and there's many, Sanatana Goswami, he was communicating with his deity. We see even Srila Prabhupada would sometimes have direct, tangible exchanges with deities. Even here in Australia, in Sydney, he offered a prayer to the deities before he left. He said, "My dear Lord, I'm leaving you in the hands of these malechas. You please instruct them. I cannot help you anymore." And we see, if you go to the Sydney temple today, you will see that actually the deities are being worshipped very, very beautifully. So you see how the devotees, that they do, especially senior or sort of more advanced devotees, have a tangible exchange with Krishna. Okay, so I wanted to move on to the next part and discuss a little bit about why do deity worship. Now, deity worship is especially beneficial for devotees who are in the beginning stages of devotional service. And as with most things in the beginning stage of bhakti, we need motivation to be able to commit ourselves to practically anything, really. And there are many reasons why we should worship the deity. And I just want to share some of them now, but just a few that I thought were quite important. You may know of others, and of course, you're always welcome to share them with me later via email or whatever. I'm always eager to learn more and more about the practices of Krishna consciousness. But I'll just go through them a little bit. Now, you can see the screen here. We've got here. The first thing is the 5 principal items of devotional service. These are explained by Rupa Goswami. There's a discussion in the Nectar of Devotion where Rupa Goswami talks about the 64 practices or 64 items of devotional service. And he identifies 5 as the principal items of devotional service. We'll go over those in a little bit. Then I also wanted to look at the 9 processes of bhakti. Now, you may remember this from the teachings of Prahlad Maharaj from the 7th canto of the Bhagavatam, where he's explaining to his father. It's kind of interesting because I won't go into too much. I'll get on to it. But anyway, he talks about the 9 processes of bhakti, and then also we can look a little bit, if we have time. I'm not sure if we'll get that far, of the 7 purposes of ISKCON. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to do was just touch a little bit on, the 5 principal activities of devotional service. Now, I couldn't really find a good graphic here, so I just put something that was close enough. So there's 5 main activities of devotional service. A nice verse in the 22nd chapter of the Madhya Lila. The 22nd chapter of the Madhya Lila is quite an important chapter because it's Lord Chaitanya instructing Sanatana Goswami on the principles of devotional service. So there's a lot of very, very important information there for those, for us, the sadhakas. And he lists the 5 principal activities of devotional service. And the first one he says is devotee association. Through the association of devotees, one can actually learn how to practice bhakti and one achieves inspiration in the practice of bhakti. And of course, then we have the chanting of the holy names, which we understand as the Yuga Dharma, and obviously we know the benefits of that. Then studying the Srimad Bhagavatam, also very, very important. And actually, there's many, many wonderful verses glorifying the Bhagavatam and how one can achieve a success of life just through the study of the Bhagavatam. Then also deity worship, and the last one is to live in a holy place. And Rupa Goswami goes on to point out, he says, the power of these 5 principles is very wonderful and difficult to understand. Even without faith in them, a person who is offenseless can awaken his dormant love of Krishna simply by being a little connected with him. So powerful that even if you don't have faith in the process of bhakti, if you're simply just a little bit connected, and this is why things like, when we do Rath Yatra and we take Jagannath out on the streets, or we distribute prasad, or we distribute books on the streets, or have Harinam, there's so many innocent people out there who don't know anything about devotional service, but they just see, the devotees, they hear the holy name, they see the deity, they receive a book, they receive some prasad. Just by being a little connected with the process of bhakti, it's enough to begin the process of awakening their dormant love of Krishna. So we can see how very, very important these 5 processes are. Then, of course, we know that Prahlad Maharaj, he talks about hearing and chanting the transcendental holy name form, qualities and paraphernalia and pastimes of the Lord Vishnu, remembering them, serving the lotus feet of the Lord, offering the Lord respectful worship with 16 types of paraphernalia, offering prayers to the Lord, becoming his servant, considering the Lord one's best friend, and surrendering everything unto him. In other words, serving him with the body, mind, and words. These 9 processes are accepted as pure devotional service. So this was a conversation between Prahlad Maharaj and Hiranyakashipu. Hiranyakashipu asked Prahlad, what was the best of all teachings he learned from his spiritual master? And Hiranyakashipu was asking about his material teacher, Sandhanamaka, but Prahlad Maharaj considered what they had taught was useless, so he told him what he'd learned from Narad Muni, and this was the statement. And as we engage in the process of bhakti, we become more and more detached from the material world, and devotion develops, and we begin to experience the Lord directly. And there's a nice verse in the 11th canto that also points this out. And it gives the analogy, just like, when you're eating, pleasure, nourishment, and relief from hunger all come simultaneously with each bite you eat. So the process of bhakti is very, 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 very potent and effective. Yeah? And we can see also how so I've got some slides here about the 9 processes of bhakti: hearing, chanting, remembering, serving lotus feet, worshipping the Lord, offering prayers, and the last one I have there, or last few I have there, is becoming the servant, becoming the friend, and offering everything we have to the Lord. And if you look closely at the picture, I don't know how well that's rendering on your screen, but we can see different personalities of Hanuman and Prahlad and Maharaj Parikshit, Vamandev, and Lakshmi massaging the feet of the Lord, Arjuna's inquiring from Krishna, as is, I think, I can't figure out who the bottom 2 pictures are, but these are all personalities who have perfected themselves through the process of bhakti, or through one of these 9 processes of bhakti, which is described also in the Nectar of Devotion. Now, a few other points that I also would like to touch on here is how remembering the Lord can save us. If you can think of different great personalities, and especially like, memories of deity worship, there's many great personalities who have been engaged in deity worship, and as a result of that, they've actually overcome various difficulties in the material world, or just remembering in general. And we can think of Bharat Maharaj. He became enamored by a deer, but then when it came to the point of leaving his body, he remembered the Lord. Gajendra, same thing. Ajamil, Parikshit, by his remembrance of Krishna. Also Bhishma, he was also able to remember Krishna. Then another interesting reason why we do deity worship is because it creates an auspicious atmosphere in the home. It's actually very, very beneficial. It's beneficial for us, of course, because we're doing the deity worship. It's beneficial for our children or for other members of the family. It creates a nice transcendental atmosphere in the home. But also, it's beneficial for anyone who visits the home. And there's even descriptions in the scriptures of that, if you're worshipping a deity at home or in a particular place, that people for quite some distance around it, I don't remember the actual figures, but it's quite a few miles around the house or the area wherever the deity is being worshipped, they actually get the benefit of the worship. I think the Shalagram Shila is a good many miles. It's quite remarkable that when you worship the Shila, how much benefit there is for other living entities. And of course, there is just a briefly touch on deity worship's role within the mission of Srila Prabhupada. We can see here, it'll come up in a second, a nice graphic on the 7 purposes of ISKCON. This is one of the statements that Srila Prabhupada wrote very, very early on when he founded ISKCON, actually in the mid-60s. And it talks about propagating spiritual knowledge, propagating consciousness of Krishna, to bring society nearer to Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada's idea was not just the members of ISKCON, but the whole society to bring them nearer to Krishna. Encourage the Sankirtan movement, that the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra should spread to every town and village, as was the prediction of Lord Chaitanya. Then erect holy places of pastimes of Lord Krishna. And of course, initially we might think of Mayapur, Vrindavan, Puri, but actually every place, every temple is a place of pastime of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because remember that the archer or the deity is one of the incarnations of Krishna. So very, very important to remember that. Then, of course, the distribution of transcendental books, and is the last one there. And we can see, teaching a simpler, more natural way of life. Many of these points here are connected with deity worship. If you look at, for instance, erecting holy places, the temple's a holy place. So when you build a temple, you install the deity. Teaching a simpler and more natural way of life. By engaging in deity worship, devotees are focusing their lives around Krishna. Propagating spiritual knowledge, we teach people about Krishna being the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We teach people to worship Krishna. Propagating consciousness of Krishna, the same thing, is to help devotees help everyone to understand that actually the deity is directly Krishna, and to bring the society closer together or nearer to Krishna. You bring them to the temple, they chant and dance in front of the deity, and also encourage the Sankirtan mission. Same thing, chanting and dancing in front of the deity. So we can see that all these purposes of ISKCON are actually connected very much so with deity worship. All the things that Prabhupada gave are interconnected. They're not like they're existing in isolation of each other. All right, so I hopefully some of what I said is inspiring to you, or it helps you to understand reasons why deity worship is so vital to the mission of ISKCON, and actually so vital to each of us to get involved in, and to try to practice deity worship. And of course, the main conclusion we're trying to get towards here is, in deity worship, there's so many rules and regulations. It's very much about rules and regulations. It's what they call vidimar, and vidi means rules. But there's a simple conclusion there, and that is to always remember Krishna and never forget him. This is the whole point of deity worship. And by engaging ourselves in deity worship regularly, we'll actually deepen our remembrance of Krishna, and we will not forget him. Okay, I think that's it. Now, just a quick note here before we move over to questions. If there's, I've got quite a long list of topics, and I'm working on a few. But if you have any topics that you'd like to hear discussed in relation to deity worship, you can either send them to me on the Facebook chat through the ISKCON Deity Worship Ministry website, or you can email them to me at nrsimha.kavaca@iskcon.org. So I'm really interested to explore different topics. I've been asked to, already have about 20 different topics, but obviously if I get more people asking for a particular topic, then I will focus on that, because obviously it's what devotees want to learn about. But And deity worship is a very, very vast topic. So just let me know what you're interested to hear about, and I'll certainly try to fit it in at some point soon. Okay, so I'll hand it over to you all now, if there's any questions at all. Okay. Comments. No, I'm not sure. Okay. No. Have you got any comments or questions on any of that so far? How can we develop respect for others? Very important question, Kirtaniya Dasi. I guess there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. And of course, the standard answer that often comes is to engage in serving others. But that might not necessarily help you to develop respect. I guess, part of developing respect is to study the philosophy. And through studying the philosophy, we can understand that all living entities are part and parcel of Krishna. They're all, his part and parcel. So that when we understand that, because we're trying to develop respect for Krishna, then we can see, because I respect Krishna, I also need to respect his part and parcels. So that's one way of looking at it. Another way that's often sort of presented is like, oftentimes, because in Kali Yuga, people are very, very complicated. And there's a lot of, I guess to use a term, there's a lot of baggage. People are contaminated by so many different types of desires, so many different types of false perceptions of themselves. And a part of I guess, developing respect to others is actually come to terms with who you are. Become happy with who you are as a person, happy with who you are as a devotee, and learn to respect yourself. Because the reality is, we may not be, experiencing, ecstatic symptoms. We may not be on the level of Krishna Prem or whatever, but we're still trying our best to serve Krishna. And I think this is a really, really important thing, is just try your best to serve the Lord. And be Krishna Prem. Hang on a second. And be peaceful, knowing that you're doing your best. And in that way, when you look at others, because this is one thing I think that really is damaging in ISKCON, is, we perform devotional service to a certain standard, or we have a certain understanding of how devotional service should be executed. And when we don't see others coming to that standard, we criticize. And it's so common in Kali Yuga that we're criticizing each other. And this is the point I was making right at the beginning. When they see disrespectful dealings, then they introduce deity worship. Now, if you look at the rules and regulations of deity worship, a lot of it is learning about how to respect the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I'll give you some practical examples. When you do the bathing and dressing of the small deities in an ISKCON temple, there's 16 items you offer to the deities. This starts off with asan. You offer him a place to sit. And then the next thing you do is swagatam, suswagatam. You say, you're welcome, you're very welcome. And this could include things like, sweet words. If it was a very, very elevated devotee, you might have a kirtan to greet them. There's so many different nice ways nice things you will offer to that personality to try to let them know that you're really happy to see them. But it has to come from the heart. It can't just be a false artificial thing. But it takes practice. It takes a little while for us to get to that point. Then the next thing you do is you bathe the Lord's feet. Now, obviously, this is a sign of respect. You're not going to bathe the feet of someone you don't like. And then you offer some argya water, which is a sign of welcome. And there's a story where Narad Muni was received with this argya water, and he felt very, very well received. He thought, these people really like me being here. So the idea is like deity worship, and this is one of the reasons, the main reason that the acharyas introduced the deity worship was so that people could learn how to respect one another through learning how to respect Krishna. Because the deity worship is not isolated from where we should be, from the culture we should be following. The deity worship is Vedic culture. And some people say, "Oh, yeah, but that's only all this Aishvarya stuff and all that sort of stuff." But if you look in books like I believe it's Krishna Das Kaviraj's Govinda Lilamrita, you can see how he's how the residents of Vrindavan, are showing that worshipping Krishna with the same thing. Even how the Dham is offering the 16 items of worship to Krishna. So these things aren't something that are not being practiced in Sri Vrindavan Dham. It's just all part of respect and learning how to respect. So it takes time, but I think we just need to work on learning how to respect Krishna, and then applying those things in our daily life, learning how to respect ourselves, and be kind to others. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others. Don't be harsh on people just because they can't live up to our expectations. Because the fact of it is we're all struggling in this material world. Yeah? Let me see what else we've got here. Okay, Radha Shalini is asking a question. Sometimes I hear from devotees that they become afraid of all the rules and regulations of deity worship in the temple and give up. What can you say to them to encourage them? The rules and regulations are actually beneficial for us in devotional service, because the idea is to regulate the mind, to regulate the senses, because right now we're completely unregulated and we just want to do anything. But by regulation, the mind and senses become under control. When the mind and senses become under control, then you can start to try to control the intelligence and etc. And then eventually you get to the point of being able to discern what is the mind, what is the intelligence. I was reading a verse and purport in the Gita the other day that was in the 4th chapter, which was talking about this, how through regulation the jiva is actually able to conquer the internal or the external struggles and come to understand the internal nature. So very, very important. And of course, this rules and regulations thing, it has to be internal. It has to be something that we internalize, not that we try to push it upon someone else. Because you'll see that different people have different capacities, and we just need to encourage them the best we can in their capacity. Not that we try to force them to be like we are, because they won't. They'll never be like we are. They'll never do things the way we do things. They'll do things the way they want to do things. Or if they feel pushed into it, what they'll do is while you're around, they'll follow. But as soon as you turn your back, they'll go back to doing what they normally like to do. So better we just try to encourage by a practical example. From Madhu Mangal, he asks a question: how can we share our deities with visitors to our homes? I guess it really depends upon their willingness to be open to things like that. If you find people are quite conservative or reserved, or they're not so open to different ideas, then you could start sharing the deities with them by sharing Mahaprasad with them. This would be the easiest way. Or you could tell them about the deities, or I mean, if they're ready for it, you could give them darshan of the deities. But yeah, I think the first way would be to share Mahaprasad with them, and you generally find that most people are always willing to have some prasadam. Sanatani Hotwani is it appropriate to wear dhoti and skirt at the same time, or Krishna should wear dhoti only? Generally, the skirt goes with pants. Prabhupada, he talks about that. He said, I have introduced this dancing skirt and pants. So usually when the deity is wearing pants, and this is normally only for the Vrindavan deities like Krishna and Balaram, they will wear these skirts with pants. Gaunitai generally do not wear them. Gaunitai generally wear a dhoti, very much a Bengali style of dress. Then Radha Shalini has another question. An interesting point. You say that people do deity worship to relieve the agitation of the mind, but the criticism, etc., it sometimes agitates the mind while being in the deity department, which was not there before. Any comment? Very interesting point. Because what we see is like, and the analogy is often used is like when you make ghee. If anyone's ever made ghee, you put the butter in the pot and you heat it up very slowly. And initially, it looks fine. It looks like, well, it just looks like pure butter. But as you heat it, you'll notice like what they call the ghee solids. They start to rise to the surface, and they're all kind of like frothy sort of stuff on the top. And you scoop that off. And then after a few hours, you're left with pure ghee. So in the process of bhakti, it's quite a similar thing. It's that when we start to perform this anatta nivriti. Anatta means the impurities in the heart. Nivriti means destroying them. At the beginning stage, we don't even think we've got any anattas. We just think we're fine the way we are. I mean, most people you speak to will let you know they're fine. They think they're fine the way they are. But if they actually start to practice the process of bhakti, then these things will start to come. And sometimes it can be quite challenging, the types of anarthas that come to the surface. But, we keep persisting with it. And eventually, as I was saying before, all the anarthas are removed. Once the anarthas are completely removed, that's Krishna Prema. So, yeah, just encourage people. Don't give up. Keep going. It can take quite a while sometimes. Okay, David Babu, I believe is the head pujari in Durban, South Africa. Often we are asked for our deity outfits for other temples who don't have so much of a financial facility. In your opinion, is it acceptable for other deities in ISKCON temples to wear Radha Rana's outfits? Yeah, that's fine. It's quite common, actually, that temples that don't have the financial resources will remanufacture outfits and just change the size of it so it fits their deities. Just practical, really. We have a dress shop in Mayapur where we offer that facility for temples also, that if they don't have so much financial resources, then we can they just pay for the labor charge, and we can remanufacture outfits so they can fit their deities. That's perfectly okay. Okay, Rahul Binyani has 3 questions. Can we get our shalagram deities painted? It depends what you mean by painted. I have seen sometimes devotees say paint their deities permanently, the shalagram. Keep in mind that the shalagram is perfect. He's complete within himself. He doesn't need to have anything done. Sometimes devotees will paint them permanently, but Prabhupada showed Janani Prabhu how to paint the eyes and mouth and nose with tilak. And tilak or chandan, maybe it was chandan actually. He showed Janani how to paint the deity like that, and he told him he should do that every day. So I wouldn't paint them. I'd just leave them. Can we offer soy to Krishna? Generally not. Prabhupada mentions that soy is too high in protein. And then the third question, interesting question, do we need to keep a separate asan for Guru while we offer Bhoga to Krishna? This really depends on your meditation or reflection. Some places you go, you'll see they'll have, like Bhaktivedanta Manor, they have asans for each person. And they're all monogrammed. They've got the deity's name on the asan. And I do believe they have an asan for the Guru as well. Other temples, they'll just have one asan. Like if you go to Mayapur, they have one asan for all the deities and for the Guru. Now, I remember having a conversation with Janani Prabhu about this years ago, and he explained that his meditation was that the asan was the Adara Shakti. So the Adara Shakti is described in the Brahma Samhita, means the accommodating potency. The Dham, Sri Vrindavan Dham.
Wow, why did you drop my phone?
And what happens is the as the activities go on in the Dham, the Adara Shakti is the Dham sort of grows and expands and shrinks and stuff like this to accommodate all the activities, and the Adara Shakti also expands and contracts. Just like, for instance, like the Vrindavan Dham, when it's expanded right out, is quite large. But we see in the description of the pastimes, the cowherd boys move from one part of the Dham to another very quickly. This is because the Dham is contracting and expanding to accommodate all these different pastimes. So in the same way, we can meditate that the Adara Shakti, the Asan is the Adara Shakti, and that all these personalities are easily accommodated in that situation. It's not like, don't think of it as one physical seat. Think of it as a situation or a place, not necessarily it's one physical seat. And in that place, there could be many seats. Yeah? Hope that answers your question. Okay, is there anything else? I think that's about it. Looks like that's it. Okay. So I really appreciate you all taking the time on today to come and participate in this webinar. I haven't figured out the topic for next week, but if you, I've got plenty to choose from. But if you have any sort of burning topics, burning issues you want me to discuss, then I'll gladly look into that and see what I can do. Okay, so thank you all so very much, and please all the webinars from the home worship webinar, they're now on our YouTube page. ISKCON Deity Worship Ministry YouTube page. You'll also see here on Facebook there's a link for the webinars under the announcements. So please, please visit the YouTube page, like the YouTube page. If you're not if you haven't joined our Facebook page yet, please join it. And whenever you see anything inspiring there, please share it with your friends. I try to find really interesting pictures of deities and devotees doing deity worship. I get sent all types of things that devotees want to post up on the site, but I just try to stick it exclusively to deity worship. Nice quotes about deity worship. If you have any quotes you want to post up about deity worship, please feel free. If you want to post pictures of your home deities or the deities in the temple where you are, please feel free to send them to the group, and I'll happily post them. Just want to work on increasing this consciousness of Krishna in his deity form. So thank you very much. Prabhupada ki jai. Look forward to seeing you all next week.